Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about active retrieval augmented generation. Large language models are impressive, but one major problem is that they often hallucinate. In other words, they may produce fluent and confident responses that are factually incorrect. One reason is that they mainly rely on parametric knowledge, meaning knowledge stored in the model parameters from pre-training. The knowledge can be incomplete, outdated, or not precise enough for a specific generation task. A common solution is retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. With RAG, the system first retrieves relevant documents from an external source like Wikipedia or the web, and uses those documents to help generate the answer. This usually improves factuality compared to using a language model alone. So what exactly is the problem with standard RAG? The usual pipeline is very simple. The user gives an input, the system retrieves documents once, and then the model generates the full answer. The issue is that the retrieval query comes only from the original input. But during long-form generation, the model may move through multiple subtopics, details, or reasoning steps. The information it needs later may be very different from what was obvious at the beginning. The paper gives a very intuitive example. Let me switch to the next page. Suppose a prompt is generate a summary about Joe Biden. At the start, retrieving documents about Joe Biden may be enough to generate the first sentence, like who he is. But later, if the model wants to write about his education or date he announced his presidential campaign, it may need additional, more specific information. So the core problem is a single retrieval at the beginning may not cover all the information needed for the rest of the generation. Also, retrieving too much information upfront can add irrelevant documents and introduce noise, which may actually hurt generation quality. This leads to the key intuition of the paper. Instead of retrieving once before generation, we should make retrieval an active process during generation. The method proposed in the paper is called FLARE, which stands for Forward-Looking Active Retrieval Augmented Generation. The figure on this slide shows the main idea. We start with the user input. Here, generate a summary about Joe Biden. First, the model generates a temporary next sentence. In step 1, it generates the first sentence like Joe Biden is the 46th president of the United States. Since this sentence is confident enough, FLAIR just accepts it. In step 2, the model predicts the next sentence, but now some parts are uncertain. For example, the school name or the degree. These low confidence tokens are signals that the model may not actually know the correct fact. So FLAIR uses the upcoming sentence to retrieve new documents, and then regenerates the sentence using the retrieved evidence. The same thing happens again in step 3 for another detail, like the date of his campaign announcement. So the most important idea is this. FLAIR retrieves based on what the model is about to say, not only what has already said. This is why the paper calls it forward-looking. It actively decides when to retrieve and what to retrieve, instead of relying on a one-time retrieval at the beginning.
Now, let's move on to the design of retrieve. The first design question is, when the model should retrieve. FLAIR uses confidence as the signal. After the model drafts the next sentence, it checks the probability of each token. If every token has probability above a threshold theta, FLAIR assumes the model is confident enough and directly accepts the sentence. But if any token falls below the threshold, FLAIR treats this as a sign that the model may not have enough knowledge, so retrieval is triggered. The threshold theta controls how sensitive the system is. If theta is low, retrieval happens less often. If theta is high, retrieval happens more frequently. So, FLAIR is not retrieving all the time. It retrieves only when the model seems uncertain. This is different from mixed retrieval methods because retrieval is adaptive, not scheduled at every fixed interval. For the second design question, we need to decide what query should be used for retrieval. Traditional previous context retrieval uses what the method has already generated as the query. In other words, it looks backward. But this can be limiting because the previous sentence may not reflect what the model needs next. FLAIR takes a different approach. It uses the temporary next sentence as the basis for the retrieval query. This makes the retrieval process forward-looking because the query is based on what the model is about to generate. For example, if the input is generate a summary about Joe Biden, simply searching Joe Biden may be too broad. But if the model's next sentence is about his education, then that temporary sentence provides a much more specific retrieval direction. So the difference is previous context retrieval asks, what have I already said? FLAIR asks, what am I about to say? And do I need evidence for it? This is why FLAIR can better match the model's future information needs during long-form generation. However, directly using the temporary sentence as a query can be risky because the sentence may contain wrong information. If the model incorrectly predicts that Joe Biden attended the University of Pennsylvania, using that full sentence as a query may prove misleading documents. To reduce the risk, the paper proposes two query formulation strategies. The first one is implicit query formulation. FLAIR maxed out low-confidence tokens. For example, instead of searching the full sentence, Joe Biden attended the University of Pennsylvania, it can search a masked version like Joe Biden attended blank. This removes potential wrong details from the query. The second one is explicit query formulation. FLAIR turns the uncertain span into a question. For example, if the uncertain span is University of Pennsylvania, the model can generate the question, what university did Joe Biden attend? Then, this question is used as the retrieval query. Both strategies try to make retrieval more robust. The query should reflect the model's future information need, but avoid being misled by uncertain or incorrect tokens.
Now I will walk through the experiments and results. The paper evaluates FLAIR on 4 tasks. First is two-wiki multi-hop QA, which requires multi-hop reasoning. This means enter a question by combining information from multiple pieces of evidence. For example, a question might be, which country is the birthplace of the author of Harry Potter? To enter this, we need 2 steps. First, find the author, who is J.K. Rowling. Then find where she was born, which is UK. Getting the enter UK requires 2 reasoning steps, also known as 2 hops. Next is strategy QA, which tests common sense reasoning. For example, a question might be, would the pear stink in water? This requires everyday knowledge, not just factual lookup. The third task is ASQA, which is a long-form question answering task. Here, the inputs are also ambiguous questions. For example, where do the Philadelphia Eagles play their home games? This could refer to the city, the sports complex, or the specific stadium. So the model needs to generate a detailed answer that covers multiple interpretations. Finally, WikiAsp is an open-domain summarization task. The model is asked to generate a comprehensive summary about the topic by gathering information from multiple sources. For example, a question might be, generate a summary about the eco school, including aspects like academics and history. What's important across all these tasks is that they require not just text generation, but also retrieving the right information and reasoning over it. So now let's look at the main result. As we can see, FLAIR outperforms the Bayesian models across all 4 tasks. Overall, it achieves superior or at least competitive performance in every setting, with particularly strong improvements on multi-hop QA. This is likely because multi-hop QA has a clear structure and a well-defined objective, which is producing a specific final answer. This allows FLAIR's retrieval mechanism to be especially effective. Now let's look at the first appellation study. The paper compares 2 ways of forming retrieval queries, using the previous sentence versus predicting the next sentence. As shown in the table, using the next sentence consistently achieve better performance. This supports the core idea behind FLAIR, that retrieval should be forward-looking. By anticipating what information will be needed next, the model can retrieve more relevant context and generate better answers. Next, we investigate how active retrieval affects performance. We measure the proportion of steps or sentence where retrieval is triggered during generation. As shown in the figure, on 2-wiki multi-hop QA, performance improves initially, but plateaus once the retrieval percentage exceeds around 60%. This suggests that triggering retrieval when the model is already confident does not provide additional benefit. On strategy QA, the effect is even more pronounced. Performance actually drops when the retrieval percentage goes beyond 50%, indicating that excessive retrieval can introduce irrelevant information and disrupt the generation process. So, retrieval is helpful, but unnecessary retrieval can introduce noise.
Before concluding, let's briefly discuss the limitations mentioned in the paper. First, FLAIR has higher inference costs than standard RAG. Because retrieval and generation are interleaved, the system may need to call a language model multiple times and perform retrieval repeatedly. So while it improves factuality, it is also more expensive and slower. Second, the gains are not universal across all tasks. The paper reports that FLAIR did not show significant improvements on datasets like Wizard of Wikipedia or Ali5. In some settings, either the output is too short for multiple retrieval steps to matter, or the task is too open-ended that retrieval grounding remains difficult. Third, the method depends on token confidence to decide when retrieval should be triggered. If the model's confidence is not well calibrated, then this decision may not always be reliable. Finally, FLAIR improves when and what to retrieve, but it still depends on the quality of the underlying retriever. If the retrieved documents are poor or irrelevant, generation quality will still suffer. To conclude, this paper reframes retrieval augmented generation as an active process, rather than a one-time pre-processing step. The key innovation of FLAIR is that it looks ahead to the next sentence, checks whether the model is uncertain, and retrieves new information only when needed. This makes retrieval much better aligned with the changing information needs for long-term generation. Across several knowledge-intensive tasks, the paper showed that this forward-looking and selective retrieval strategy is effective, especially compared with methods that retrieve only once or retrieve based only on previous context. So the main takeaway is better RAG is not just about retrieving more documents, it is about retrieving the right information at the right time with the right query. Thank you.